Hello and welcome to the Everyone Has a Story podcast. Today I get to tell one of my most favorite stories growing up. I have a brother-in-law named Merle, and Merle is what I consider that man's man. So let me set the scene. I'm about 13 or 14 years old, and it's the fall. And growing up, the fall meant Denver Bronco football and deer hunting with my dad and his friends and Merle. And so this one particular fall, we're in one of Merle's vehicles, which was a 1958 Chevy station wagon that he had turned into one of the first of a kind homemade four-wheel drive vehicles. And so when we would hunt with Merle, and he was the driver, which today he is, anywhere in the mountains, he would make his own road, his own path. So that's where we are. We're now up about almost at the top of this ridge, but instead of driving to the top where it's a little bit flatter, we're about 90% of the way up, and we're driving parallel to the top of the ridge, which means we're on a slope. And that slope sometimes felt like if someone sneezed, we were going to start rolling over, and that would mean probably about whatever number of rolls to go down this 500 or 600 feet. So none of us were really talking or anything like that. We were all kind of looking out. And so the station wagon had 8 of us, 5 adults and 3 children, me being the oldest of the 3 children. And it was a sunny day, so Merle's driving. He's got his window rolled down. He's got his arm hanging out like he's driving down the Pacific Coast Highway. And about that time, he stops right on a dime, and he goes, by God, if you look across the draw there, which was probably about 500 or 600 yards, he said, look at that. There's 2 deer laying down over there. And we're all looking like, how does he see that? Which none of us can right now. So he says, let's get the binoculars on it. So everybody jumped out because we were all afraid the car was going to tip over and start rolling down anyway. So we all get out, and it was a perfect chance to catch our breath. And sure enough, looking at it, there were 2 deer laying down over there, and one of them was a male, a buck. So it was what we were hunting for. So I don't remember who at the time shot and killed the deer. So we're all now hopping back into the car, and we're thinking he's going to go around the top and then come down. But anyway, he says, nope, let's just go straight down. So now he takes a 90-degree turn, and we are now heading like a bat out of hell straight down this mountainside. And about that time, my dad is saying something like a father would say to protect himself and his child, and saying, Merle, let's be smart about this. But Merle's got it pegged, and we're going as fast as we can down that hill. We get to the bottom thinking he's going to stop there. We'll just climb up the 300 or 400 feet, get to the deer, and drag it back down to the bottom where the car is. Nope, he didn't stop. He stepped on the gas even more, and we started going up the other side of the hillside, speeding as fast as we can. And about that time, the car kind of stalled out. We couldn't make it up any farther, and we probably about 50 yards away from the deer. So my dad's thinking he's going to just step on the brake, we'll get out and do our thing. And the car starts rolling back, and there's no brakes. So now he says, okay, guys, hang on. We have no brakes. So now we're speeding down backwards to this hill. My dad is now letting Merle know that he's not really happy. The other adults are just hanging on for dear life. I'm a kid. I think I'm in a theme park. I'm having the time of my life, not really understanding what the fear is. We get to the bottom, and on a dime, he turned the wheel real fast, and we stopped. And my dad, great, as he started opening up the door and the other adults started opening the door, Merle steps on the gas and heads back up that hill with no brakes. Now my dad and some of the other adults are now chiming in saying, Merle, turn this thing around. You have no brakes. And Merle goes, no, we'll get to the top. Well, we got a little bit closer, but not quite enough. And now we're starting to roll back down for the second time. So I'm thinking this ride is just getting better and better. You can't pay enough money for this kind of a theme park ride. Well, sure enough, we get close to the bottom. Everybody's hoping that Merle's going to turn the wheel like he did before, and we're going to just stop on a dime. Well, he turned the wheel not quite the same way, because all of a sudden we now started rolling. So now we're like Jiffy Pop popcorn in that aluminum pan. We are now bouncing around. And we got to remember, we all have guns. They're not loaded, but none of us are wearing a seatbelt. So we are really literally flying around with this like popcorn. So we get to a stop. Everybody crawls out because we did stop on our tires. We're now stopped on top of the car, so we can't move any farther. So at least we got out, and all the way up to get that deer, my dad and the other adults were letting Merle know that that was the last time ever that he was ever going to pull a stunt like that. So anyway, I tell the story because today we're talking about being sitting in the driver's seat and taking control. But what I want to preface this is that we're going to talk about taking control and not being out of control, like I've referenced my brother-in-law Merle to be. So with that being said, when we are born, I truly believe that we are all put on a path, and we have guides. It could be parents, it could be mentors, it could be teachers, whatever. But we're now, from day one, we are now being led down this path. And so what that path has done to what I think, and my guest speaker today, what we believe is that that path has turned us into being more of a robot, being a part of this conformed nation, that we all have this life that we're supposed to and we're expected to follow. But what happens is over time is we stop taking control of our own decisions. We stop taking control of the path that we want. And that's what we're going to discuss today, because there's nothing worse than going into a place of business. You're excited to go there for whatever reason, and you feel like you are talking to a robot. Or better yet, you walk into your own business or wherever you're employed, and you feel like all of a sudden as you clock in and you sit down at your desk, that you have become that robot that is conforming to the culture of that business and not being able to think on your own and not really taking charge of what needs to be done. And that's what we're going to talk about today. So let me introduce my guest, Gabby Cadena. How are you?
Good. That was quite the story.
Oh,
I was just thinking it'll get better.
No. And when we came up with the title of Sitting in the Driver's Seat, I knew exactly that Merle's story was going to be the highlight of that story next to your experience here. So Gabby is an executive coach. She's an organizational culture and leadership growth professional, which you got to just love the title of that. So Gabby, tell us a little bit more about you. And I know you have a story for us to start off the podcast.
Yes. Well, first of all, thank you for having me here. I just did not know that I was going to get such a story to begin with. So thank you for that. Now I get
Absolutely.
to And well, I have actually worked with clients for over 7 years, helping them achieve their goals. And I've recently just shifted my focus to leadership growth and organizational culture, like you mentioned, while studying organizational culture and how to improve it. So my goal is to help leaders and organizations do better and be better. And you know, as I'm listening to you and listening to your story, sometimes it does feel like you're just watching all these things go. And I think there comes a time when you were a child, but I think your dad was thinking, I'm going to grab this man out of that driving seat and get in there myself. So I love that. I think while we're talking about, while you were telling me that story, I kept thinking about this. There is a lady I met some years back, and she was, you know, when you talk about going into this new leadership roles, new businesses, and going in there, that was one of her first jobs, and she went in there and was really good. She was really smart. And she got promoted pretty easily. She was hitting the numbers and doing very well. And I loved her. She was just sweet and smart. And as she got promoted, I got to see her struggle a little bit. And she would talk about her inability to get, you know, in touch with their team, not being able to get them and organize them to a point where they could have their goals reached at the end of the week. And I remember asking her, well, why do you think you're struggling? And she's like, I don't know, my supervisors and upper management is telling me to do all these things, and I'm doing what they're telling me to do, and I'm getting them in trouble, I'm writing them up, and I'm talking to them. And so we kept having conversations, and eventually I was curious and I asked, what about you? Why don't you do it your way? What do you want to do? And she was just looking at me a little bit confused as to what do you mean me? I'm following everything that I'm being told to do as a leader to succeed because that's what everybody else has done. And she really had no idea what that meant. And so we started talking a little bit about her leadership styles and what she wanted her team to be like. And it was completely opposite to what she was being told. She had no punitive bone in her body and struggled with that. And we talked a little bit more. Essentially, she realized that she needed to be her own type of leader and do things her own way. And we're talking about getting into this driver's seat. She got in that driver's seat in her leadership position and eventually was pretty successful. Was able to do things her way, was able to really connect and have that meaningful connection with her team. And it really changed things around. So I think after a while, she realized the value and power that she had in her approach and stopped doing what everybody else told her to do. So that was my starting story, because I think that's the first time I realized, conversations and some guidance and just curiosity could really open up that door for success, especially in those roles when you don't really know what you're doing. You're just following everybody else's steps. And the truth is, it's always here.
Absolutely. So, unlike my story with Merle, which I hope is unlike my story, that most people in this world have not had that experience of someone behind and sitting in the driver's seat. But I think that we can all relate to your story with this woman who was moved up the corporate ladder and is now expected to lead teams, lead individuals, but do it in a way that is not natural to them. And it's not part of their natural way of doing things. And so you mentioned, and I know I've mentioned also, that we're talking about taking control and when you're sitting in that driver's seat. So just to help everybody out what is your definition of that driver's seat?
So, gosh, I think when we're talking about that, the first things that come into mind is present, intentional, mindful living. When we're driving, you don't ever want to be distracted or thinking about everything else, but we do. And unfortunately, that's why a lot of things happen. But there's no active participation into what we're doing. So in this concept, when I talk about getting people into their own driver's seat, it's really bringing them back into taking on ownership and living their own life and taking some accountability into sometimes snapping out of that distraction or not being intentional as to where they're going and what they're going to do.
So why is that important today with individuals throughout the world?
It is so important because we only have one life, man. I think nowadays with a overwhelm of information coming from everywhere, our phones, our computers, televisions, our fridges even have iPads on them now. Like it's just, there's always a way to get distracted and get you off your path, off your journey. And that life that you were given can be stolen so easily from a variety of things. And it's important to understand the concept of being an active participant in your own life, because it can change the way you interact with others, the way you do your work, the way you lead. And in turns, it can really have an impact at the organizational level, at the national level, and even within your own family with whatever it is that you hold most precious.
So you mentioned earlier about being in the present. And I'm sure by now my audience knows, especially after 180 episodes, that I really am a firm believer that we all need to be intently and intentionally and purposely in the present more often than not. How does being in the present fall into place with your definition of sitting in the driver's seat?
If we're not present, we miss everything that we're here for, what we're meant to be doing, our connections, our impact on this world, on others. And when we're not present, we're distracted, we're thinking about everything in the book, we don't realize how much of our lives are being wasted in either overdoing productivity, being too busy, not really doing much, and really how that impacts the way that we experience our life. So if that presence is not there, there's real no mindfulness, no intention to what you're doing.
All right. We have become a generation or a culture or society, whatever you want to call it, of really needing to know what our ROI is going to be if we decide to make changes in our life. So, what are some of the real results that an individual can achieve by being in the present and taking control of their lives, wherever there is, professionally or personally, while sitting in the driver's seat, their driver's seat?
I think I can answer that with I've told you a little bit of my story and how, for the most part, for most part of my life, I actually followed everybody else's roadmaps, everybody else's expectations, whether it be cultural, family expectations, just always was told what I needed to do to be successful, to be happy, to be okay. I mean, you can open up Instagram and there's 1,000 different ways to be living your best life, and I think when I realized that shift, because it's not something that I've read about and I decided, oh, this is a good idea, this is a good concept, it's something that I experienced. Moving from the co-pilot seat and letting everybody else tell me where to go, what to do, and how to live my life, and doing the work necessary to step out of that and take a step back and really change that perception of, I can do my own roadmap. I can go wherever I want, and the fulfillment that came from that, the ownership, and I think most importantly, the responsibility and accountability of that. Of every day, I have to be responsible for my life the way I want it to be. It's a lot easier to get a blueprint from somebody else and do that. I think it's a lot harder to do the work and say, this is what I want. So when you're asking me real results, I think that ownership and control over your own life and that freedom that comes with it, it's something that many blueprints and successes and trophies will never give you because it's somebody else's. So it's experiential, but I think it's fulfilling.
Okay. So let's step away from just the individual context of sitting in the driver's seat and go now to the workplace, the place of business, the organization. How does sitting in the driver's seat, does it apply here?
Yes. And I'm glad you asked me about that, because as a leader, when you step into your own driver's seat, chances are you're going to step away from everybody else's driver's seat, right? So you're going to be less stressed. You're going to do less. You're going to enjoy more. You're going to lead more versus standing on that co-pilot, telling everybody else where to go and what to do and how to do it. So this concept of stepping into your own driver's seat, it's taking accountability for you, for the way you lead, for the way you experience, and the way you impact others. And when you do that at an organizational level, at a team level, you can see that shift, and you take accountability for yourself and responsible for your own actions and growth, and turns everybody else will follow. So then at that point, you start cultivating that organizational culture shift.
Okay. And we're now finally at the very tail end of the COVID-19 pandemic crisis. So there's a lot of things that we have learned about the old workplace and now introducing to the new normal, the new workplace. So what you just said about sitting in that driver's seat in the at the workplace and at the organization itself, why should that matter today? Or why does it matter even more today?
Oh my gosh. I was listening to and of course I would not remember. It was a conversation between some thought leaders, and the point was our work environment is not the same that it was before. Yeah, sure, we've had pandemics in the past, but the way the generations are shifting and employees' expectations are changing, it's not something that we've seen before. Even the growth in organizational culture and the work that's been done to improve hasn't been as popular as it has been in this past couple 5 years. So it is needed more than ever, because we have never seen this shift in organizations and culture at work in this way. So to think that we can go back to work at some point and have the same attitude from employees, and to just go in and get it done and, clock in, clock out, do your job and really not think about anything else, it's not realistic anymore, because it's not the reality. And thankfully, younger generations are shifting the expectations for employers. So you no longer have the employer expecting the staff to come in and produce. Now you have employees coming in and saying, okay, but this is what I want in order for me to be the best I can be in here.
Can you share with us an example to really put that into a different perspective?
Yes. I think I want to say it was probably right before the pandemic. I attended a training with a group of management, management team, and it was a training about generational changes and how each generation responds to leadership and management and work differently. At the time, the focus was millennials and how we work differently, we think differently, we see it in a very different way. And then, of course, you had your older generations, and it was just a very mixed, generational background team. And the conversations were very interesting. So then after that training, I talked to the CEO and I asked her, how do you feel like this is helpful? How does this help you? She was in her, I want to say, well, I'm not going to say ages, but she was older than me. Let's just put it that way. She was way more wise than me. And she said, even though it's frustrating to understand why you ask so many questions, it helps me know how I can support you. And knowing that it's not only a generational thing, but a shift that we can't prevent, we can't avoid, helps me help you. And in turn, you bring more to the agency. Then I was like, okay, that's interesting. So then I asked a supervisor who was around my age group, and I asked, what did you think about that training? And he says, it's interesting that people are asking those questions and understanding that for me to succeed, I need to know this information and I need these tools. And it's important to have that so that everybody can succeed. And he gave me some examples, like the way he addressed conflict was very different from other management styles. And he said, if I was to behold to that expectation of how to address that, I would have completely failed, because that's not how I work. But I was given the freedom because they understand this is how I need to do things differently. And so overall, I think when you have that very good mix of open-mindedness and acceptance and willingness to grow your team and trust your team by giving them that ability and the tool to sit in their own driver's seat, I think you give so much more back, when we're talking about that. So I thought that was super interesting because everybody has so much to say.
So I'm glad you brought up the example about the multitude of different generations that we have here and the different personality types. Now, have you ever been a passenger in a vehicle when a senior citizen, your grandma, grandpa, were driving? Their control is a little bit different than, let's say, the generation of your mom and dad, which is a little bit different than the generation that you were brought up in, and vice, and all the way down, right? So, does your definition of being in the driver's seat, does it change somewhat depending on what generation that individual is coming from in their perspective?
Yes, because everybody's experience of that is unique. It's based on your background, your life experiences, your own perception of your life. So absolutely, I think when we run into issues as when we have different generations in the same car trying to go to a different place or the same place in a different way, that's when we start having those, because now everybody wants to be in that one seat and it's impossible. So there's only one driver's seat and everybody needs to be in their own, which, doesn't mean that it's taking away control from everybody or giving too much freedom. It's really holding everybody accountable to say, okay, now it's your turn to drive. You use your skills and your strengths and your values and take us where we need to go. And we're going to sit back and let you do that and help you succeed.
Now, I don't know what the actual numbers are, but the majority of workplaces today have multi-generations in it. Mm-hmm. And they all have to abide by the same rules. They all have to abide by the same culture that has been established, if one has been established. But that doesn't mean that they see everything the exact same way. Obviously, we know they don't see things, and how they get from point A to point B is completely different depending on what generation you're referring to. And so, do you find that in the world of sitting in the driver's seat, going down that highway of business, is there a certain generation currently that might be more prone to getting a ticket, some type of traffic violation ticket in the workplace because of how they're driving that vehicle, whatever they're in charge of?
You want me to put some people on blast here, huh?
Yes, I do.
You know what? I'm going to try to be as objective as possible. I think we can say the younger generation can be the ones. And then, of course, it depends on circumstances. It depends on what kind of business we're running. It depends on what we're trying to do. Because think about tech companies. They'll say it's the older generation that's keeping us behind or whatever. We can really start a debate over who's at fault here. But what I like about this concept is that it's all about self-accountability and doing that inner work. If you don't do that, then yes, we're going to sit in that co-pilot seat and say, you're going too fast, you're going too slow, you're not going left, you need to turn here. And at that point, we don't accomplish anything.
So if your coaching gig doesn't finish the way you want it to, I think you have a great possible career in politics. That was a very good answer. And I think you just picked up a lot of votes in case you decide to leave coaching and go into politics. All right. But with that being said, I'm not going to hold you accountable to any of these proclamations you just made to your constituency, but I am going to ask you to put your executive coaching hat on and your organizational culture hat on, mm-hmm. and tell us tell us, your solutions. Right now you have not a great number of years behind you, but you have enough. I think that you are probably one of the most intuitive people I've ever met. You see things and hear things differently and sometimes more clearly. I don't know if it's because you have a different filter than most people or whatever, or different backgrounds than different people, different past experiences, but you're very intuitive. And so, based on everything that we just talked about today on taking control, it doesn't matter what generation you come from, since you're now the politician as well as the executive coach, but then also because we're now talking about putting them all under the same roof and working together. What are some of your solutions that you would offer or suggest to these individuals, to these companies, these organizations, to help themselves and their staff move forward into giving them a little bit more control behind the driver's seat, behind the wheel of the driver's seat?
So my approach to that, my solution is really planting that seed for an organizational culture of empowerment, in which everyone can be encouraged and trained, and really they can act from this mind space of taking ownership and taking control over their own life, their work life, and just their experience as a human. So, really is teaching people to take a step back and reassess and reevaluate. Am I on that driver's seat? Am I on that co-pilot seat? Am I in the back seat screaming and telling people what to do, and I'm not doing anything back here? Having that insight. And then when we can do that as leaders, we can now teach the younger leaders, the future leaders to do that. So a solution is really, obviously, I'm not going to fix it all. I don't have a magic wand. I would love to, but I don't. But I think having that ability to identify, hey, this is not your roadmap. Let's help you develop your own.
Yeah. So before I give you your opportunity to put some closing thoughts here, I have to ask you one more question. This is probably the most important question of the whole podcast. If you were sitting where I was in the very back of that station wagon, going up and down that hill with no brakes, and Merle was driving and you were not sitting in the driver's seat, what words of advice would you say to Merle to maybe have him think a little bit differently before he goes up that hill for the second time with no brakes?
I would probably say, I just saw another buck this way. Stop, look for it.
Fair enough. I never thought about that scenario, but you know what? Next time I'm in that situation, I'm going to remember that, or hope that you're sitting right next to me to where you can think that fast. I love that.
Yeah,
and that's why I think that, when you are thinking about going into that world of politics, I'm going to be your campaign manager, because I think that a lot could be said and learned by you. So anyway, Gabby, I can't thank you enough for being my co-pilot today and letting me actually be your co-pilot during this podcast. But give us some closing thoughts on really to inspire us to take ownership of our own lives, our own position, wherever we work, and not demand, but at least take charge of being in the driver's seat and making things happen the way we think it should be.
I feel like I think that this was in one of our conversations, what I do want to say is to the young people, the people on social media are handing you a roadmap and it's not yours. To the older generations, I think I would say, listen to the younger people and question, how did you get there? Was that your roadmap? And I think and this not even, we focused a little bit on generations, but I think as a human, as an individual, we have to stop sometimes and look around and use our people, use our community, and use those connections to be better and do better. I think we all have that responsibility. So that's what I would say. I think that's on us to make it better for the next ones coming after.
Uh, Great advice. And I think we just found the platform for your campaign speech, your first one. So, thank you again for being my guest speaker. How can someone get a hold of you if they want to reach out and learn more from you in your services?
Absolutely. Right now, LinkedIn is probably the best way to reach me. I think it's a good place to connect, to see what I'm working on, to read my articles, and really so we can just have a conversation. I love talking to people about their stories, learning their perspectives, and always learning from others is my passion. So if anybody disagrees, please reach out and let's talk. And if you agree, reach out as well.
I love it. Well, thank you again, Gabby, for being my guest today.
Thank you for having me, John. This was awesome. Thank you.
My podcast wouldn't be the same if it wasn't for my sponsors and my great supporters. So let me take this opportunity to thank each and every one of them. First of all, I want to thank Rebecca at Custom Bookkeeping and Accounting, delivering trustworthy bookkeeping services since 2003. Dave and Dara at Virtues Matter, making this world a much happier place to be with their Virtues card apps, coaching, and workshops. Stephen at Buller Accounting, giving business owners depth and insight to their numbers. Eric and his team at Ivy Cat Web Design, the real superheroes of web development and design. Jennifer and Jean at the Seavers Real Estate Team, serving Pierce and Kitsap counties with their home buying and selling needs. Maury at the Maury Method, the world's only brainwave entrainment engineer, helping everyone have more clarity, less stress, and overall better brain health. Priya at Pivot My Profit, helping individuals and businesses have better control of their finances and more money at the end of their day. Melissa at the Soul Vibe Energy High, the queen of the aha moments, helping individuals find those holes in their cups, repair the hole, and gain back their positive energy. And finally, Rick at West Sound Recording. You talk, they do all the rest. Thank you, Rick, for all your efforts with the production and editing of my podcast. My podcast wouldn't be the same if it wasn't for my sponsors and my great supporters. So let me take this opportunity to thank each and every one of them. First of all, I want to thank Rebecca at Custom Bookkeeping and Accounting, delivering trustworthy bookkeeping services since 2003. Dave and Dara at Virtues Matter, making this world a much happier place to be with their Virtues card apps, coaching, and workshops. Stephen at Buller Accounting, giving business owners depth and insight to their numbers. Eric and his team at Ivy Cat Web Design, the real superheroes of web development and design. Jennifer and Jean at the Seavers Real Estate Team, serving Pierce and Kitsap counties with their home buying and selling needs. Maury at the Maury Method, the world's only brainwave entrainment engineer, helping everyone have more clarity, less stress, and overall better brain health. Priya at Pivot My Profit, helping individuals and businesses have better control of their finances and more money at the end of their day. Melissa at the Soul Vibe Energy High, the queen of the aha moments, helping individuals find those holes in their cups, repair the hole, and gain back their positive energy. And finally, Rick at West Sound Recording. You talk, they do all the rest. Thank you, Rick, for all your efforts with the production and editing of my podcast.